What follows is a conversation I had with my son, Ben Wagner, who's aged 38 and lives in Chiang Mai, Thailand. I'm aged 59 and live in Bellevue, Washington, which is just across the lake from Seattle. We've been wanting to do a podcast for a long time, and we finally got one. Hopefully you like it. Here it is.
But yeah, started diving into saw a news report from a senator. I believe it was Montana. Let me double check where this was. Yeah, the Minnesota senator, Dr. Scott Jensen, said he got a 7-page document from the I believe it's the Ministry of Health or the MN Health. To fill out death certificates with a diagnosis of COVID-19, whether the person actually died from COVID-19 or not. So basically what he was explaining was this document said, if they had a patient in a hospital that died of, say, pneumonia, and that person had been in contact with, say, their granddaughter or something, and even if that granddaughter was asymptomatic but had COVID-19, that they could put on the death certificate COVID-19. So that raises quite a few issues, and I think that's worth discussing. Which is, right now we're being bombarded by death tolls, right? That's basically how we're keeping track, or how we're gauging the severity of this. And I think it's fair to say that everyone is questioning the severity of this. So how do we get people to not question it? Well, let's make it seem as severe as possible. That would be a logical place to go from, as the media, not necessarily the scientists and the doctors, strictly just the media, to make this seem as severe as possible in order to justify.
Who told this Minnesota, what was it, a governor? Where did that come from to count it as COVID-19? The federal government?
Let me look up the Instagram handle, because the Minnesota Department of Health.
So the Department of Health wanted the governor to basically count as many of them as COVID-19 as possible.
Yes. So they were allowed to put on death certificates if somebody died but had been in contact with somebody that had COVID, that didn't even test positive themselves.
That is really weird. So it would elevate the death toll from COVID.
Correct.
So somehow the Minnesota, probably it's the Minnesota Health Department, MN Health.
Yeah, the Minnesota Department of Health. I just looked it up. That's who he received a 7-page document.
Okay, so they must benefit in some way from having a higher death count number. Like they get more federal money or something.
Yes, that's exactly the case. For every patient with COVID-19 admitted to a hospital, gets $13,000 from, I'm presuming, the stimulus or the federal
emergency funds, FEMA maybe, or
emergency something. Yeah, something like that, where they're actually trying to help the hospitals with this particular virus, right? So they're getting money, and there's even a higher payout for people that are having to be put on respirators, I assume, to cover the cost of those respirators.
Yeah.
So for every COVID patient these hospitals get $13,000 in funding, and for every patient with COVID that has to be put on a respirator, they get $39,000. So there's a monetary benefit to these hospitals to pump these numbers basically as much as they can, in a pretty non-ethical way, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's
really what's going. If that's what's really going on, because I mean, to be fair, most things are really hard to track down the legitimacy of these days, and I don't think
where did you read
it? It was a news. It was a news. It was a video news program. It looks like KX4, KX4 in Minnesota. I think it's a local news station. And the newscaster is interviewing the senator, the Minnesota senator, who is a family practicing doctor, apparently. But again, I haven't looked into.
So the senator said that.
The senator said that.
That's interesting.
According, I mean,
that's straight from the horse's mouth. I mean, that's probably true, right? I mean,
it says Minnesota Senator and Dr. Scott Jensen said that he received a 7-page document. So let me look up Dr. Scott Jensen and see that he is indeed the Minnesota
senator.
Because I think a lot of people take this stuff and don't really know. Minnesota.
We need a Jamie with us, don't we?
Yeah, that's how, it's funny is I was watching some really early Joe Rogan podcasts, and he's got like his laptop in front of him. So the Minnesota senator, it's only showing Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith. Klobuchar and Tina Smith. So it looks like it was he is not a doctor. So why does it say
senator and doctor?
It says MN, right? Abbreviation for Minnesota. And then it says SEN and DR. So I'm assuming when you look at that, it says Minnesota senator and doctor. That's how I would read it, right?
Yeah.
But that's not who was talking. Who was talking was this Dr. Scott Jensen. And it's on the news. It was he was on Fox News, and then I just saw this earlier today on what looks like a local Minnesota news station. So I posted the one on Fox News, and I've been kind of having a back and forth with somebody about the legitimacy of sources. He was kind of asking me where I was getting my sources, and then he was telling me where he was getting his sources, and his sources were all, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, MSNBC, CNBC, so or CNN and stuff like that. And I'm like, YouTube. But it was kind of funny because we were having this discussion about the legitimacy of sources, right? And so that might be the core of what's happening right now. And it kind of harbors back to a lot of things that Noam Chomsky has been talking about for 50 years, basically, which is the media. So back in the 70s and the 60s, and probably even before that, the way we got our news was the newspapers. That was the majority of how news was found out. And so in those beginnings, there was a very solid base of reliable, I guess you could say reliable or trusted news sources, right? The Associated Press, New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, those kinds of things.
Sure.
And those became sort of the main megaphones for news. But they're not independently funded. They all these media outlets are owned. And then when you start looking at who they're owned by, you start to question, well, these companies. So it's like this: if New York Times, and this is just a hypothetical, if the New York Times is owned by a parent company, GE, and that company underneath it owns another smaller company, and there's just an umbrella of companies underneath the parent company that owns the New York Times. Now, is the New York Times going to be unbiased in articles that it prints or that it sells to the public about certain companies that might be included in that umbrella. You have to ask yourself that question. Is there going to be any bias whatsoever, or is there going to be even a necessarily a push towards the back of the paper, or perhaps limiting of information?
Well, there's a lot of
And
decisions that have to be made by a newspaper, like what things to cover and how to cover them and where to put them in the paper. So there's a lot of decisions,
absolutely,
and they could be influenced in a lot of ways. And somebody could make a phone call and say, "Hey, bury that story." That's totally possible. I don't know if it happens. Probably happens at least with some newspapers.
right. And there's even there there's even so when it was, when we didn't have the technology that we have today, the internet, the ability to spread news as fast as possible. Um, these major ones. This is back in the 70s, 60s, and stuff like that. These major newspapers would send a printed sort of bullet point copy of the newspaper articles that they were going to be printing that day to lower local newspapers, right? So the New York Times would send basically a telegram of the articles that they were going to be printing in the next day's paper, so that those newspapers knew what was worthy of the New York Times, and so it would almost be echoed through the local governments as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You mean local
right, the
paper?
national local papers, right? The
Yeah.
local papers would get the major papers what they were going to be running the next day, so that they had a little bit of a jump, and so that their a newspaper is worthless the next day, right? So they had
Yeah.
had a little bit of a one up on that. So you have to ask the legitimate source, and what is it? And I want you to tell me what you think it is.
What I think a legitimate source is?
Well, what do you think makes a legitimate source, and what would differentiate a legitimate source from a less legitimate source?
Um, just for the source, I would say it would be something that has proven to be trustworthy. So they very rarely get something wrong or are caught in a lie.
Okay.
That would be the more trustworthy sources, and ones that you have no track record because they're brand new, or that are clearly biased and are often distorted. Those would be less trustworthy.
Okay. So the less trustworthy description that you just said, I think would apply to pretty much every major news channel out there.
So the New York Times lies.
The New York Times lies, ABC News lies, NBC.
Can you tell me a lie
They
that the New York Times did?
Sure. One of the more recent ones, which was interesting, which has been spreading around the internet, is that, and I believe it was MSNBC or CNN. They ran a news segment using footage from an Italian hospital when they were talking about a New York hospital. And this was proven that it was footage of a full scrambling Italian hospital. And the segment wasn't about an Italian hospital, it was about a New York hospital.
And this was CNN
And
that
they
did
got,
this.
and this was CNN or MSNBC, I can't remember which.
Okay.
Um, but they did it twice, and they got caught twice doing it. And then what happens? So what happens now when a news station, especially these major ones where there's a lot more eyeballs on them, a lot more fact checkers, what happens is they'll run an article, and they don't fact check. They don't really do the due diligence now, because the news cycle has gone so millisecond, breaking news constantly, that they don't even have time to check this stuff out. They just
I
run the
don't know if
article,
that's
and then,
true.
well, okay, maybe that's
I
not
would,
true.
or
Maybe
let
they
me
are
let me put it
checking.
this way. I would doubt that's true. I would doubt. I mean, first of all, this is CNN, not the New York Times. I would like to see an example. I'm sure the New York Times has gotten a few things wrong, but they have a really good reputation for not getting things wrong.
Well,
They're,
this is the problem with that, is that they'll they'll offer a redaction, I believe is what it's called, right?
mhm.
So if they get
Or
something wrong,
retraction,
they'll
I think.
retraction,
Or
retraction,
you mean that when they're saying we got this fact wrong?
right,
Yeah,
right. So they'll come out with that the next day, or if something goes, hey, this wasn't right, or this number was wrong. The problem is that news has now been spread everywhere.
sure.
And how many people are actually paying attention to all the retractions?
Yeah, and
So
they
the
usually don't
initial
put it
wrong
front and
one,
center.
right? So the initial wrong one is the one that gets spread.
If it's good,
Now,
juicy.
if it's juicy and fear inducing and
Yeah.
panic inducing, it's probably spread by them. And you can make the case that damage is already done. That a lot of people are have already made up their mind about whatever that article is about, whether it was wrong or right, and aren't going to change their mind now that the retraction comes out
Hmm.
or even see the retraction. So you've got a real issue with the legitimate sources versus the unlegitimate sources or the illegitimate sources. And I think that at the core is what people should be looking at and should be questioning that.
What do you
And
think people should do about that?
well, and I think that's where these alternative news channels that are deemed non-mainstream and thus susceptible to more scrutiny by the general public, because it's not coming through the main airwaves, it's coming through these sort of subsidiary pathways. Um, it's easy to dismiss them, and I don't think that we should so easily dismiss them. I'm not saying that we should take every non mainstream source of news as more legitimate or less legitimate. I'm just
Yeah,
saying that I think that there is a potential um, to get your information from more than one source. And
for
I
sure.
know that you agree with me on that
Yeah,
wholeheartedly. And I think that isn't the case for a lot of people. A lot of, and you can see it almost in the leaning of Democratic and Republicans. You could almost say unequivocally that Fox News, the majority of their audience would consider themselves Republican, and the MSNBC, the majority of their audience would probably consider themselves Democratic or
yeah,
liberal.
for sure.
So you already have a bias on, or it's already biased. Then, like at that point, you know, they're going to cater to their audience. Um, so I think it's a good idea for people that mainly watch MSNBC and just say Fox News is a bunch of crazy conservative like Trump lovers, to maybe broaden their horizons a little bit and start either doing a little more investigation into what's being told and not just blindly accepting every single stat that comes their way.
Absolutely.
And and I mean, I think that the sheer panic and the sheer amount of fear right now is a direct result of people not doing that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Oh, and there are some sources that go out of their way to be neither left nor right leaning. The Week magazine is a really good one. They'll take a major issue and they'll have basically what is the opinion of the Wall Street Journal, and then what's the opinion of New York Times on that same issue, and what's the opinion of USA Today on that same issue, and it's almost like they set it up like they're arguing with each other. But the good thing about that is that if you only heard the point of view of, say, MSNBC is saying it in such a way that they know their audience is going to appreciate it. They're coming from the angle and the values of their audience, and there are other factors involved. And a lot of people have a kind of overly simplistic view of issues. So you get people have they'll have an opinion about something, but it's all one-sided, and their information that they've gotten is all one-sided. But there's another side of that. Obviously, if it's a controversial issue, there's another side to that, and probably there's legitimate arguments on the other side, not just nonsense. But if you don't get
Right.
any of that information, then you think that then anybody that comes up with a comment or something on the other side, they seem like complete idiots. But that's only because you don't know what they know, you know. And so the Week magazine is really good for that. There's a free newsletter that you can get email called The Flip Side, that literally gives you quotes from the left and the right about a single issue every day, or I think 5 days a week. There's another one, I think it's called Know Here, KNOWHERE, and they do the same thing. They'll give you the story, basically neutrally given the story, and then at the end they'll give you the left headline on that story and the right headline on that story. And that one's really interesting, the way, just the angle that they give you on this.
And that brings me to my second and third point is um, the headline. And I think it's I don't think you can really argue that we live in a click-based news cycle, and so
Definitely.
whatever headline is the catchiest, most clickbaitable is the one that they use. And I've even found myself doing this where I see a headline that fits with my narrative and I share it before I even read it.
Yeah,
And
me
I've
too.
done that. I've done that and then gone to the article and realized it was an article from 2 years ago or something, you
Yeah,
know? And but the headline really starts talking about something that's really happening right now. And it's kind of confusing because like I actually did one yesterday where somebody shared a news article about Australia banning um, the 5G network by Huawei. I don't even know how to pronounce that company, but it's the cell phone company.
oh, it starts with
Huawei.
a H.
Yeah, it's like Huawei
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something
yeah,
like that.
Chinese company.
Yeah. So I was like, wow, that's amazing because I've been reading about all these, where I've been watching videos about this guy down in Australia. Um, I think his channel is called The Crow House, and he's pretty uh, outspoken, and you could probably lump him into the conspiracy theorist category. But he's very much an outspoken against 5G, and so I was like, wow, Australia actually did it, and like I shared the article, and then I opened the article and realized it was from 2 years ago. So I immediately took it down. I deleted it off my Facebook page. But that happens, I think, to more people than we realize.
For sure.
That
And a
the
lot of people
sharing of
don't read those
information.
articles and don't even know that, so they're taking it the same way that you did, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've
Yeah, I've
gotten
done
to
it
that
before,
point.
and I've had the embarrassment of people putting in the comment that's 2 years ago, or that that I, they read the article and I hadn't, and then you have egg on your face. You're like, oh, how embarrassing is that?
But that gives me hope, right? In a way, that's like kind of the army of fact checkers. Like I want to be held accountable,
Yeah.
and as much as I
Oh,
think that
absolutely.
I think these news channels should want to be held accountable, but I don't know, because of their need to basically either promote a certain narrative and also for their own survival as far as money. I don't know that they are taking the needing to be completely honest and fact checked as seriously as some people that are just the average consumer. Like I have, I don't know, I have maybe 1,000 Facebook friends, and I admire it when somebody points out something wrong with something that I posted. I'm like, oh, thank you for pointing that out. I missed it or I fucked up.
Yeah.
Um, and the problem is when it happens, when that same scenario happens with, say, a mainstream media article, when they're like, hey, you just blasted to 60 million people across the world because you're a major news source, and it's wrong. And then they do offer the retraction on the back of their newspaper or something, or at the bottom of their page. Does it matter if they even retracted at that
Well,
point?
I think it does matter in the long run, because they become known. Like CNN is actually, I've seen a lot of people criticize them for their, jumping the gun on their stories and getting things wrong. You know, I haven't heard I mean, I'm sure that New York Times has done that, Wall Street Journal has done that, but not nearly as much. And so they're more trusted. And all of these, of course, are going to make mistakes. But in a way, the whole media, uh, as a whole, is sort of peer reviewed. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
people will, if somebody gets something wrong in CNN, a bunch of people will write about it, including the other newspapers, because they're in competition with these guys, right? They'd be glad to point out something that
Right.
CNN did wrong. And so, they get the same feedback just like we do. If we post something wrong on our Facebook page and somebody tells us about it, they're getting the same kind of feedback. But here's the thing. There's another side of this. One is a reputation in general, in the general population, for your trustworthiness. The other is your loyalty, your loyal readers that like the point of view that you're presenting, that like even if you get it wrong, they still like it, because you know what I mean? Because that's
Yeah.
because you're singing my song, you're saying what I want said in the world. And so, that's another kind, I mean, you would think most people want newspapers that are telling the truth, right? That would be one of the things that they
Mm.
like about a newspaper or a news source, but there's something else that people get out of that news source, and that's the comforting news from your point of view that you agree with, which is
It's a confirmation of your worldview, right?
right. Yeah. So it's like another thing, a different thing that you get out of a news source besides news. you know.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect segue into why conspiracy theories are so prevalent now. Is I think that there is a general distrust in these sources because they have made mistakes and repeatedly have made mistakes. They might be doing the best they can, but they've made mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody is infallible. We're all human.
Right.
But I think that there's a growing sense that we are being purposely misled. And I think that's what's given rise to so many conspiracy theories, because I think that there's a general feeling that we're not getting the truth. And it's not just from these articles that are proven to be inaccurate. We're starting to question the ones that aren't retracted. We're starting to question the ones that are claiming to be truth. So once you've sowed that seed of doubt to the point where you can no longer trust, I think it I think the reasoning behind conspiracy theories is that, well, if they're not telling the truth, maybe it is completely on the other side. And so you sort of you swing the pendulum so far to the extreme that you start believing the earth is flat, and you start believing in the cabal, and you start
It's
believing in
all a
these.
lie.
Well, if the doubt is heavy enough, and I think it is getting to the point where um, I don't know that a lot of people trust very much in general, and it can be extrapolated on not just the news. I mean, I think that trust in general, from being sold things constantly, um, and I found this in just learning marketing and advertising, that the level of your average consumer of trust is at an all-time low, basically. That people question things. And I was talking to my friend Colin, who was selling solar power for a little while, and he would meet with people about solar, and he would explain to them all the benefits of solar and how it would save them tons of money in the long run. And people wouldn't be interested. It would almost be like, no, that can't be true, kind of thing. It's like, that's
Hmm.
too good to be true. That
Hmm.
I couldn't possibly spend $40,000 on a solar panel roof for my house, and in 5 years, it's literally making me money. No, I can't believe that. And he was running into that wall of doubt for something that was legitimately in their favor.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big overwhelming problem in our society, is that I think our level of trust in a lot of things, not just the media, is at an all-time low.
I think maybe it's a problem, and it's also a good thing. I was just I saw a picture of this. It was like a, how they used to sell medicines in a little jar, and you drink this medicine, and it, makes you feel better. And this is a medicine from, I think it was from the 1800s, and it contained cannabis, heroin, cocaine, and alcohol, and it
All the good stuff.
and it made people feel better. you know
No
so
shit.
maybe people were more trusting then. I don't know if that's really changed. I mean, it may have. It's possible that it may have. I'm sure somebody has done a study on this, um
Well,
but
cigarettes, right? Cigarettes were touted as healthy for a long time.
yeah,
Doctors would recommend Camels over Marlboros, and
I don't know
and
if
that
everybody believed
started
them
to
though.
shift.
I mean, I know that there's
Mm.
always been salesmen trying to sell things, but I don't know if people are less trusting now than they used to be, but maybe they are. It's possible. And if it is true, then it's in many ways that's a good thing. What I was just one of the I'm reading that book called Conspiracy Theories and the People Who Believe Them, and it's all each chapter is written by a different person, and they're expert in a different way on this topic. And one of them was he was talking about that in a function. I think he was a political scientist. And he was saying in a functioning democracy, you need you need a combination of trust and distrust. You need a certain amount of trust so that the machinery of the society can function. But you need a certain amount of distrust because there are people who will always try to take advantage of their positions of power. Right. So you need a combination of those, but you can't go too far one way or the other. If you go too far on the trusting
Yeah.
side, then you will be exploited, guaranteed, right? And if you go too far on the distrusting side, the society starts to fall apart, right? There's certain
Right.
kinds of things you need to just there needs to be enough trust between people to be able to function as a democracy. Anyway, I thought that was interesting because I had never really thought about it uh, as being a balance, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. That there has to be a balance,
Yeah.
and
And that's the part, and I
I
think that's the part that conspiracy theories play. One of the parts that they play is to make people question the mainstream news that you're getting. I
yeah,
mean, a lot of it
absolutely.
is, of course, nonsense because they themselves are trying to make money, and they themselves are producing. I'm talking about the conspiracy theorists themselves are trying to produce something that's going to get them attention and it's going to get them readers or watchers or whatever. So you can't trust them really any more than you can trust anybody else. But it is sometimes true that independent bloggers or people that make videos or whatever have broken stories that the mainstream had been ignoring. It does happen. Not very often, but
Well,
it does happen.
and I think that's kind of where marketing and advertising has evolved. I mean, just look at the sort of emerging Instagram influencer, for instance. Advertisers have probably known for a very long time that when you have something endorsed by somebody, um, that people who are fans of whoever is endorsing that product are going to trust whatever it is that they're claiming
Sure.
that
They're going to be
product
more
is good
likely to
for.
try it for sure.
And with the
Yeah.
advent of Instagram, where you have seemingly pretty normal people, or pretty like, I wouldn't say average, but I would say, not it's no longer relegated to just A-list celebrities,
Right.
promoting a product. You have really hot girls that are promoting, lotion products, but they have 5 million followers on Instagram. So it's sort of gone into, let's have this person that's not mainstream per se, but has enough of a following that people are going that and like people that like them and like their pictures and stuff, they're going to trust that more. And that kind of that is, you could almost say that, in the mainstream Fox News and MSNBC and stuff like that, they have a X amount of followers, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's if they had an Instagram page, which they do, but in terms of viewership, it's a followers basis basically. It's the same thing that Instagram has. It's just on a more pronounced stage.
Right.
And I think that in order to circumvent the doubt that is growing in those sources, you now have all these alternate sources, that have followings of their own, and people trust these people, for basically the same reasons that other people trust Fox News and other people trust CNN. And so it all plays into the follower mentality and, wanting to believe somebody that fits your worldview. Um,
So in both of our minds, I guess what you would want is more people to challenge their own world view, right?
yes, that would be
Okay.
the
But
ultimate
that's
goal. Is
really
to
difficult
is
to do.
it
As a matter of
is
fact, I think I remember seeing a study that most people don't challenge their own worldview. Most people, if they change their worldview, it's because they were challenged by somebody they loved, a friend or a family member. Almost always. Uh,
I could go along with that. I mean, I would say that your worldview, starting as a baby, we can just take the United States as an example. You start off, being told, America is such a great country. Just go with a very broad, start with a broad brush here.
mhm.
Um, and so as you grow up, you've been told that, and everyone around you and your family members and your loved ones always talk about how great America is. And then something happens. Say something like 9/11 happens, right? Now, when the conspiracy theorists came out and said that 9/11 was completely, not only was it, not, perpetrated by the people we say it was perpetrated by, but it was actually U.S. government funded. That's a very strong position against your worldview.
For
That's
sure.
almost, impossible for people to even wrap their heads around. They're like, no, no way that America would have crumbled two of their own buildings, in order to further their war agenda. It just doesn't seem even possible
Hmm.
to a lot of people who, for most of their lives, are under the assumption that America is just doing what's right, and is a great country, and we won World War II for the world and all this stuff, right? All this indoctrination that we have. So our worldviews are very, very rigid from the get-go, and I think that's on purpose. I think that there is, and you can obviously say that your worldview isn't necessarily a fact, because if you grew up in Iraq, your worldview is going to be completely different. Your perspective of the United States is going to be completely different. So your worldview is not a
Maybe.
fact.
I mean, there's a lot of people in the United States that don't like the United States, and there's actually a lot of people in Iraq that love the United States.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, but I mean,
that's um,
for an individual family, maybe I think that's accurate.
let's take language, right? Language. If you were born in Iraq, you're not going to necessarily speak English. You're going to speak Arabic or whatever language. And then if you were born in Germany, you're going to speak German. You're not going
Hmm.
to be raised in, and and if you're born in the United States or Canada, you're going to speak English. Or in certain parts of Canada, you're going to speak French too.
Certain
So
parts of the United States, it'll be Spanish.
right. So your worldview is literally a product of your environment. I would say. I would say unequivocally that your worldview
Largely,
is,
yeah, I would say largely. Could
yeah.
be, I mean, there's a lot of things that can affect the way you look at the world, but yeah, the way,
But for the most part,
yeah,
it's the world you encounter creates your worldview, and in the same way, it creates what language you speak.
yeah.
So those are really hard to go against, I think, and it would stand
Well,
to
there's not a
reason
lot
that
of motivation to go against them. You know what I mean? Because that's the way you think about the world. I mean, it's almost like what you want. You know, most people don't want more chaos and uncertainty. I don't think. You know, they would prefer to
yeah,
know what's going on and feel more comfortable. I certainly do. I think you do too. Just you don't wouldn't want to deliberately have be confused and maybe uncertain about the world. You know, like I don't know what's going on. I don't really know what's true.
right.
No, I think most people are lean toward, if they can, feeling like they know what's going on. You know, and so,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
so there's not a lot of motivation to like constantly be challenging your worldview.
Well,
I think it's
I
a
would
good
say
thing,
that
but
if not given, if not the challenge of changing your worldview isn't um, isn't it it's inherently because we want to feel secure. We want to feel like we know, just like you said, because the unknown is terrifying, and
well,
that's
it
why
can be. I
everybody is
mean,
afraid.
the unknown could also be exciting, but when it comes to like your understanding of what you how you think the world is, how do you think things are, reality, you know, you that I would imagine it would be well, I don't know, it's not necessarily terrible, but you don't usually seek it out. Like I've just been reading this book on conspiracy theories, and I've just not liked them. I don't like people that put them forth. I don't like people that share them. I don't like conspiracy theories. And just I'm not even I don't think I'm halfway through this book yet, and already I've changed my view about conspiracy theories. Not that I'm all gung ho for them, but I see the purpose, and I see that there's a value in a democracy for people that are constantly challenging the whatever common narrative there is and questioning it and making other people question it. And there's always a value to in any democracy. There's a value to somebody that's always willing to go against the prevailing view. You know, like somebody just that you know there was a couple of conspiracy theories that just went around about the coronavirus being a man-made virus, right? And so
Mhm.
some scientists looked into it, and I think that's the appropriate response to anything that is at all reasonable as a possibility, is to look into it rather than just immediately dismiss it. So some scientists did look into it and were able to trace it to an animal, you know, and I guess there were some markers. I didn't understand the science, but there's some markers that tell you whether this is a man-made virus or a naturally occurring one. And they concluded that it was naturally occurring. Of course, it could have been, you know, they could have been paid shills, but I think it was
Mhm.
published in a reputable uh, journal and so on. And that's in the same category as newspapers. You know, some journals, some scientific journals, have a higher reputation for integrity than others, and people come to trust them because because they're so rigorous about that. You know.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I don't remember who published it though, but I remember at the time being convinced by it. You know, but anyway, I think that's a good response to a conspiracy theory. Is, you know,
Absolutely.
considering that it's possible, you know, there are evil people in the world. People do terrible things, and there are people that take advantage of their power, and you know, but I would have to say there's another side to this. I was thinking about this today. I'm like, if you're an archaeologist and you know that, you know, Clovis points, that's a kind of It's a kind of spearhead that they found in North America. Um, and I don't remember how old. I think they're 13,000 years old. And all the Clovis points that have ever been found were radiocarbon dated to 13,000 years ago, right? And you know this, and you're an archaeologist, and you know all about it, and you're an expert in your field. And then somebody says they found a Clovis point that's 200,000 years old. Your first response would be doubt. I'm not sure that that's true, you know. But the rational response then would be, and this is kind of like what's beautiful about science in general, is everybody who's an expert about Clovis points looks into it and either disproves it or it changes the theory, the
Right.
ongoing developing theory, and I think that's what everybody's response should be to this kind of thing. Is, if there's any possibility that this might be true, then somebody should look into it. Like, as a matter of fact, just today, Bob, Bob, good friend of mine,
Yeah.
he sent me a thing that I don't know how to pronounce this, but I think it's like glycosylate or something like that. It's something that's in Roundup, and he said there's a woman that found out that this really affects gut bacteria, and I think she's written a book or something, and he's a fan of hers anyway. And she said she's the one that broke the story about how it affects gut bacteria, and she just wrote a thing that said that the places where COVID-19 has, she said there's a difference. Obviously, some people are getting COVID-19 and not hardly getting sick, and some are getting really sick, and why would there be such a disparity? And she thinks it has to do with how much glycosylate or glyphosate or whatever it's called is in their system, that substance makes people more susceptible to COVID-19. And I thought, okay, now this is potentially big news, but she's just, this is the first I've ever heard of this. And uh,
Interesting.
I said to Bob, I said, somebody should look into this. I said, you should send this to Dr. Fauci. Fauci.
Yeah.
you know,
Fauci.
Fauci.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should send this to him. So he wrote me back a little while ago and said, I sent it to him. That was a great suggestion. Because he's got people that can look into stuff like that. If there's any legitimacy to that, there's something that could be done about that. You can
Right.
eat foods, for example, that have less of this in it, and it might help you survive COVID-19, right? So there's something really direct you could do about it and might help the whole thing, right? If it's true, or it could be just somebody's stupid theory, but there are people that would be able to find that out. I think that's a good response to conspiracy theories or anything that's new and nobody's heard of this before. Maybe your first response would be, who's she and what does she know? How could she know something that the experts don't know? Well, it's possible. It's entirely possible. It happens sometimes.
And not only that, but when you approach it from, okay, well, maybe the makers of Roundup knew this, just like when the tobacco industries knew that their product was causing cancer and deliberately hid that from the public.
Yeah.
Um, and and then you start having to follow the paper trail, and Monsanto being the creators of Roundup, and how Monsanto was bought by another subsidiary. And I believe I heard that Bill Gates has a heavy investment in those companies. And that brings me to vaccines. Vaccines are a whole nother thing. See, the thing that I want people to realize is that there's more going on than just at face value this virus. The push for vaccines, mandatory vaccinations, should
Now,
raise
is
everybody's
somebody pushing
eyebrows.
for that?
Bill Gates is.
Pushing for mandatory vaccinations?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Yes. Um, I mean, I think he has a pretty clear track record of wanting to vaccinate everybody.
I know he wants to, but of course he does. But you mean legally mandated vaccinations?
Yes.
where you have to go in and get your shot.
Seems
I've
like
never
a
heard of this.
pretty well, it seems like a pretty logical place to go from here. Look at what happened. You have to have a complete economic meltdown, which is happening. You have to have a threat of a virus, something that a vaccine can be created, and everyone can be like, well, I don't want the economy to tank like it just did ever again. So if we have the possibility of taking some vaccine that will prevent this from happening again, then I'm going to sign myself up for it. See, that seems like a pretty straightforward A to B, B to C to me.
Okay.
And a
There's
lot
a
of people
couple of
want to
things
say
wrong
that's
with that.
conspiracy. Okay,
First of
what's
all,
wrong with it?
I want the vaccine, and I think probably if you polled people, most people would want to take the vaccine themselves. And if, as far as I know, you only need a certain amount of a certain percentage of the people to get a vaccine for it to pretty much slow down any outbreak. So I don't know what the number is, but it's like 60%. If 60% of the population gets the vaccine, it pretty, the a viral spread can't go that far. I don't know if it's 60%, but it's some number. There's some number that
Is
they,
a herd
mathematically
immunity,
works
right?
out.
Isn't
Yeah.
that isn't that
Yeah.
the
So not
theory?
everybody
Yeah.
needs to be vaccinated. And I think most people would want to get a vaccination just because why would you want to get sick? I know a lot of people who get a flu shot every year, just because they don't want to they don't want to be out of work for a week or two and suffering, you know, why would you want that when you can just go in for sometimes for free and get a vaccine, right? So, and for sure for things like measles or COVID-19, I don't want to get it. So I would want to get it. And I think most people would want to get the vaccine. So anyway, and so, but the problem I have with the way that you put that is that it sounded like you're saying somebody has released this virus so that they could force everybody to get vaccines. And I just don't
Oh,
think there's a
that's not how
remote
I that's
possibility that that's true.
no, that's not that actually is not how I meant it, and I
Okay. But
don't think
that's
that
what it
it's
sounds
man-made
like when you
at
present it
all.
that way. These are
Right,
the
and I
conditions
think
you'd have to have in order to control a population. Is what it
well,
sounds
I
like you're
think
saying.
what's that quote? Never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah.
Um, it's a perfect crisis to push forward something. I mean, these aren't old. I mean, Bill Gates has been talking about vaccines and pandemics for years now.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not a new. It's not like this happened and then now all of a sudden he's pushing for vaccines. He's been pushing for vaccines for a very long
Yeah.
time.
It's the,
So,
I just actually saw a thing today that was, it was the guy, I think he's the head of Gavi, which is a group that they work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and they do vaccines around the world. And his reason he said the reason that Bill Gates likes vaccines so much is that although it takes a lot of work to create it, he said it's a lot like software. It takes a lot of work to create one, but once you have it, it's super cheap. You can produce bazillions of them. And literally, the vaccines that they've given around the world have saved literally millions of lives. People that would have died of measles or smallpox or whatever that didn't die because of these vaccines. So once you have the vaccine, it's super cheap. You can save someone's life. You can save millions of lives with one super cheap and easy thing. That's why he likes them so
absolutely.
much.
Well, absolutely. And I have no problems with that perspective. What starts to raise my eyebrows and starts to make me question it is um, the industry in which it's created. First of all, the pharmaceutical industry. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have much trust in them,
Me neither.
and the fact that a vaccine is protected from litigation.
What do you mean?
Meaning, if somebody takes a vaccine, somebody gets a vaccine, and then they have health complications, you can't sue the company that made that vaccine or gave you that vaccine or the hospital that administered that vaccine.
Hmm.
You
I didn't
can't.
know that.
They are protected by law from litigation and
And
from
that's
being
just in the
sued,
U.S. or
basically.
that's worldwide?
As far as I know, it's the U.S. Because we're sue happy, so that's probably the main place they want to stop that. And that, I think, gave rise to a lot of the anti-vaxxers out there, and the people that were saying how it's causing autism and everything else. Um, but but the very fact that they are protected and don't need to be, I mean, most pharmaceutical drugs, even as corrupt as the pharmaceutical companies are, have to go through a pretty rigorous amount of testing, and that's one of the things that vaccines take so long typically um,
Yeah,
to
they've
develop.
already created, I think something like 17 different companies have already created a vaccine for coronavirus, for COVID-19. That what takes so long is, first of all, testing it, and then second of all, growing it. Like I was just reading about how you make a vaccine is you take the virus, you inject it in, or there's several ways to do it, but the main way that they do is they inject it into an egg, like a chicken egg, and then they let the virus grow in the chicken egg. I mean, you have to actually make the virus in order to get a vaccine. Then they somehow weaken it, and then they put it into a vaccine. So there, you have to test it first. That takes the longest, and then you have to manufacture it, grow it until you have enough that you can put into, you know, enough vaccines, and then package them up and send them out. And, so there's a distribution of it, the growing of it, and then but mainly the testing of it takes a long time. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
as it
know. You
should,
said
right?
something about pharmaceutical companies being corrupt. I don't know if I would call it corrupt. I'm sure there is corruption. Yeah, there's a lot of money at stake. I know they have powerful lobbyists. I know they wield their money with Congress, uh, like the oil company does, like anybody does that has the money. Um, but I don't know. They do create uh, miraculous medicines and have saved bazillions of lives. Um, and
They also create opioid epidemics.
uh, I don't know if they. I really don't know. I know that there are doctors that did that ignored the warnings on it and stuff like that. I don't know if the pharmaceutical companies, they probably had something to do with it, but um,
There's a lot of money. Anywhere there's a lot of money,
somebody's going to
I
be
would
corrupt. I would bet.
there's going to be a level of corruption that,
Yeah, but I don't know.
because there's
But I
just
don't know
too
if it's
much.
fair to say all pharmaceutical companies are corrupt.
Oh no, it's never fair to say all or never or none. It's not fair to
Well, it
say
is
that ever.
sometimes.
Yeah, I guess so.
uh,
Yeah, I'm sure there's
yeah,
a lot there. I'm sure there's pharmaceutical companies out there that are actually trying, like there's actually some CBD. I just read there's a CBD um uh prescription medicine that was just FDA approved, which is awesome. And is no longer under the schedule one uh, category, which is a great progress. Like we need more pharmaceutical companies doing stuff like that. Um,
I don't even know if that was is it a pharmaceutical derivative of CBD, or they just legalized CBD?
and no, I think it's a pharmaceutical derivative of CBD.
Hmm.
Um, I forgot the name of the prescription drug exactly. They always have these weird
Yeah,
names. Sound like planet.
Xyloft or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Zortax.
Well, and so coming back to pharmaceutical companies, the idea that you can advertise now for pharmaceutical drugs should um, should be an indication that they are profit driven, right?
I have to say, uh, the advertising had, so they used to, the pharmaceutical companies used to really schmooze doctors a lot. They would buy them, memberships to golf clubs, and they would send them on vacations, and they'd wine and dine
What do you
them
mean
and stuff
used
like
to?
that. Well, they don't do that anymore. It's actually illegal now.
Hmm.
Congress, which I think is kind of funny, because Congress passed a law. They realized that pharmaceutical companies have have way too much power over doctors, which would lead the doctor to, prescribe it more, right? I mean, just if they were not sociopaths, they feel some obligation to this company that's schmoozing them like this. And so they would be more likely, or probably statistically more likely, you know, give a prescription for that drug, right? So the Congress passed a law so that it limits how much money pharmaceutical companies can spend on doctors. And which I think is really funny because, and this is a whole other issue, and maybe we should do a podcast on this, but so clearly Congress understands the principle that if you're allowed to take money from somebody, you're likely to be influenced by that money. And that, you know, the doctor has an obligation to the patient, not to shouldn't have an obligation to the pharmaceutical company, right? Well, the same principle
Right.
should apply to Congress. Congress should not be allowed to take money from anybody, and yet they are allowed to take money from people. And Congress should be responding to the needs of their constituents, not to the people who are giving the money. But they haven't yet passed a law for themselves.
Amen to that. Well, and doesn't that just strike you to the hypocrisy, the level of hypocrisy that exists in that alone?
Yeah.
Saying that pharmaceutical companies are no longer allowed to basically bribe doctors,
Right.
but being passed by the very people that are being bribed by all kinds of corporations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Sure. That would be, it
yeah.
would
So
definitely be a
corruption.
harder one
Yeah.
to do. I mean, you know, in all fairness, if you are a member of Congress, it would be easier to pass that doctor law, pharmaceutical law, than it would be to pass a law that basically all the people that have put you in office would no longer be able to have any influence over you. So you'd be screwing your your money bags, you know, by passing that law. I think
Mm-hmm.
it could there's a way to get around this, and there's an organization called Represent.us that is directly attacking this problem and doing a really good job of it. But there is a way to get around it. Part of the way they do it is they start at the local level, as a lot of laws have done, like, you know, women getting the right to vote. They started at the local level and moved up into, you know, city, and then county, and then state, and so on. But another way to go about it is you can pass a law that doesn't go into effect for another 12 years or something, you know. So,
Mm.
you know, I mean, you could do it that way, and it is entirely possible to do that. And of course, all of them, all of their supporters, financial supporters, uh, might be really unhappy about that. So,
Well, didn't
like, the
they? I mean,
doctors
didn't they
didn't
also?
vote for that. You know what I mean? The doctors didn't vote for a law to prevent them from getting money from pharmaceutical companies. You know?
Right. Right. Well, that's the funny thing is like, so it wasn't that a big topic a few years ago about, and that's kind of where the super PACs and stuff came from for politicians running, was that they realized there was a big problem with, you know, basically big corporations able to donate serious money to a
Really,
candidate.
un, unlimited amount of money. That was the problem, I think, with the super PACs is, like, I think there must be some limits to how much money somebody can give to a congressman for their campaign. I'm not sure, but I think there must be some limits. I think that the super PACs kind of got around that, like an
Right. It was
independent
like a loophole,
organization.
basically.
Well, it's like basically they're saying, if, you know, like, for example, if you personally wanted to endorse Bernie Sanders and you had a lot of money, you could put up a billboard that says vote for Bernie Sanders, right? Why should you be stopped from being able to
Right.
do that? I mean, and the Supreme Court said, look, that's free speech. It's your money. If you want to spend it on that, there's no constitutional uh, limitation on that says that you shouldn't be able to do that. They said it's a matter of free speech, which you can understand that from that point of view, that is totally understandable, right? That's not too
Mm-hmm.
many people. I mean, you should, if you, in fact, you personally wanted to put up a billboard that endorsed Bernie Sanders, or put a fucking, you know, bumper sticker on your car, you should be able to do that, you know?
Yeah.
But,
But
but,
then when
you
you
know,
start treating corporations like people, and corporations have vested interests, specifically financial interests, and they start putting up money, then it starts to get dirty.
well, there are people that are as wealthy as corporations, like Bill Gates, for example, you know, that has, he has more money
Well,
than
from a
most
corporation.
corporations.
Right, right. And how did he get his money?
I know, but he owns the money. I mean, he has money himself, and a lot of the
Right.
people that are putting together these super PACs are just wealthy people, like the Koch brothers, right? So that,
Well,
you know,
but they
it
have
doesn't matter
vested
whether,
interests in corporations.
I know, but it doesn't matter whether it's the corporations putting up the money or the people putting up the money. There's a huge amount of money that can be put up. Unlimited amounts can be put up to support one candidate or another.
Oh, okay.
That's the
Yeah.
law,
Well,
right?
right. And then those rich people that have certain companies have, obviously, they want certain things done, whether it's going to benefit those companies that made them all their money, or their friends, that whatever laws they want passed that will benefit them monetarily. That's when it starts to get dirty, right?
Well, I mean, they could be doing it just because they think it'd be good for the country too, and that could be. I mean,
Well, yeah,
it's all
everybody could be
dirty. The
doing
fact,
everything just for the benefit,
yeah, but I don't
but
know.
that's not always the case.
I don't know how you could. I mean, I suppose it's possible to pass a law that would make it so that nobody could endorse a candidate. I don't know if I don't know if they would, but what I
I
would
think they
like to see,
should.
I would like to see that the candidates themselves are not allowed to take any money from anybody. Because if
I think
you
that would
if you're
do a
getting
lot.
if you're getting money directly from somebody, you know who it's coming from. Uh, you would be hard pressed not to feel you owed them a favor. I mean, a normal human being. I mean, it's a really, I mean, in the book Influence, which is basically this guy, it, tries to figure out what makes people agree to things. And one of the 6 principles he's got in there is reciprocity. And that
Yeah.
that means it's such a fundamental element
Human
of the
instinct,
human
really.
psyche. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so fundamental that you people are manipulated with this thing. Like, the one of the examples they used was the old Hare Krishnas used to, they raised a huge amount of money they would have people in airports just handing people a flower, and then they would ask for money for a donation for the Hare Krishna Society. And they raised huge
Right.
amounts of money and they would press the flower. They would almost make you take the flower, you know?
Mm.
And a lot of people do that with mailings now too. They'll send you, like, address labels, and then ask for money. And there's a really strong impulse to give back when somebody has given something to you, you know. And
Absolutely.
if somebody has put you in
Look at the
power by
credit
giving you
system.
$180,000, and then they come, 2 months later and say, "Can you do us a favor and not vote on this bill?" Ugh, a
Yeah.
normal human
Right.
being is going to be really feel obligated, Anyway, so if
Right.
you,
It would be unnatural for it to not be an influence.
yeah. On the other hand, if you had a super PAC, if you had some anonymous person promoting you, and you didn't know who it was that was promoting you, I don't know if that would be in the same category. Might be.
But it wouldn't be possible. Like,
Somebody find out, right?
what would stop the Koch brothers from just calling up, you know,
Yeah,
Hillary
that's my
Clinton and being
PAC,
like,
by
"Hey,
the
I
way.
just donated $1 billion." Yeah,
Yeah,
like
that's true.
you can't. So the only real solution is to eliminate money completely, which seems like a far reaching idea that will probably never happen. But that would be the only way, I think, is to have people. But then, but that if that's the case, if nobody needs money to run, then you're gonna have 100,000 people, like, the dude from Tiger King running for president. Um, so then you
Yeah,
run
I
into
wonder.
issues like that as well.
Yeah, that could be handled though. And there must be. I mean, there's a lot of people that want to be on America's uh, Got Talent too. You know what I mean? They'd figure out a way to like,
Right.
you know, filter it down or whatever, it,
Right.
you know, there would be a way.
Usually by voting. That's usually how you do it.
Yeah. But I mean, they could have like local, local debates, and whoever gets voted in, goes up to the higher level or something. I mean, who knows? There's probably ways to do that. But the idea is that you would give politicians, each politician would get X number of minutes on television or something, and each politician would be allowed to be in the debate or whatever, so you would have, and so but they wouldn't have to pay for it. This would be their campaign. They could go around and, I
Right.
guess, give speeches if they wanted. They could make YouTube videos if they wanted, um, and I think it'd be cool.
I can't wait for you to watch those Zeitgeist movies. I think we should have a podcast on after you watch one.
I was
We'll
actually thinking of
we'll
doing that.
discuss it.
This is my plan, because when I first watched it, I think I watched it because you asked me to, and I remember
Years ago, right?
hating it. Yeah, it was like when it first came out, 2007, I think. And but I had so much to say about it, but like, I didn't have any way of doing anything about it. So this is what I was thinking, is I would actually podcast, like I would watch it for a while, and when there was something I came across, I'm like, I have something to say about that. Say it. And then I could have a
Yeah.
podcast that's called What's Wrong with Zeitgeist. And then you and
And
I could
what's
talk
right
about it also.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well, the
anyway,
thing I like about that documentary series, because I mean there is conspiracy theories in that for sure. And what I do like about it is how it breaks down the financial system. And I think at the core of what is wrong with the world today, basically, is the financial system that we've created, and it's not sustainable. I think that's the main point of those Zeitgeist movies, is that the system we have in place is not sustainable.
talking about the
That it is
U.S.
a profit
monetary
driven.
system or the world.
Well, I mean, you can the world monetary system now, right? I mean, the world basically follows the U.S. monetary system. The dollar is basically the standard for which all of the monetary systems are based. So
But
you could
if
say,
it did become the yen or something, would that still be a problem as far as you're
well, it's
concerned?
no, but it's yeah. As far as I'm concerned, it's the same thing now. But
Well, what's
but
the
the central
problem?
banking system,
As
the
you see
central
it, what's the
banking
problem?
system, the problem I see is that we have we have gone away from the exchange of goods and services in exchange for money, and now money makes money in and of itself. So we basically converted our financial system into a system in and of itself, basically Wall Street. um,
You talking about investing, stocks and stuff like that, or interest?
yeah, interest, debt, credit, all of those things.
You
um,
think that should go away?
it's not sustainable.
What do you mean?
I think, well, I think it's pretty clear that the amount of money and the amount of debt doesn't make sense. Meaning, if all the debt in the world was suddenly paid back tomorrow, there would be $0 in the world. And
Well,
on
there
top
wouldn't
of
be
that,
$0 in the world because
because
those people who were owed money now have it.
but
Like
every
all the
dollar is
people that
owed
owed
to
me money
somebody.
would now be in my possession, right? So they'd have money. So there
Right,
wouldn't
right,
be zero
right.
dollars.
So who would have all the money? Who would have all the money? The banks, right? The central bank, because
Are
the
they the
central
only
bank,
ones
the
who
Federal
are owed
Reserve,
money?
everybody is owed money somewhere. Every dollar is owed. somewhere.
I know, no, I know, but like you said, it would all be in the banks. But I don't think the banks are the only people, the only entities that are owed money. Maybe they are.
Well, think about it. Where's all the money come from?
Hmm.
So the idea behind that is, and the clever thing that the banks did was that they created a thing called interest. So now, not only is the debt, not only is the money in circulation, not even everything would be going back. So debt and money are equal, but then you add on top of that the idea of interest, and now there isn't even enough money in the world to pay back all the interest. So where is the money coming from?
The government keeps making more.
And I don't think anybody ever thinks about that. Yeah, right. They keep making more, right?
Yeah.
As if as if as if the money actually has value. What value does it have? We just agreed upon its value. It
Yeah,
doesn't really have any
that is
value
it.
in and of itself. The value is what we give it.
Right. It's a representation of value.
Right.
Yeah. Symbolic
So
representation.
that's not sustainable. And I don't think it's hard to see that that's not sustainable.
I'm having a hard time seeing how that's not sustainable.
And
The reason I say that is because money has been used for thousands of years. Before that it was
right.
shells, that
Right.
represented
And it
value.
was based on something.
Well,
And like
shells aren't really that
before the central
valuable.
banks,
You know what I mean? Shells aren't.
well, gold isn't that valuable, but we give it value.
Gold is
It's
really
rare,
useful.
right?
It conducts electricity beautifully. As a
Right.
matter of fact, just today, uh, Klassy was, using a pair of my headphones, and she goes, "Man, these sound so good." And I go, "Well, it has gold in it. It uses a gold as a conductor rather than some other kind of conductor. And gold is a really excellent
Right.
conductor, and it's beautiful, and it doesn't corrode.
Oh, I
These are all
know.
valuable things."
Don't get me wrong. We've been obsessed with gold for basically
Yeah, but
since
even
we've
before that,
discovered it.
shells.
um,
Shells were a form of money, right? And they're not really valuable, but they
mhm,
represent value. That's the whole purpose of money, is to represent something. Because
right.
it's too clunky to carry around a couple of live chickens because you want to go down to the store and buy a pack of cigarettes, right? So
Right. Right.
it's just easier to carry around. It's a representation that's easier to carry around. So
Right.
what would you replace it with? If it's not sustainable, what would you want to replace money with?
Resources.
What does that mean?
A resource-based
Like
economy.
chickens?
I guess what we need to survive. And I think that's where, the monetary system was born out of. Was this person had timber, this other person had chickens. I'm going to trade you to uh,
For sure. Barter system.
to trees, barter system, that
And
kind of thing.
and every culture went to money because it's a lot more convenient to carry
It
around
is. It is more convenient. It is more convenient.
and more
Absolutely.
flexible. So what would you replace it with? Resources. What does that mean?
Um,
Units of resources, right? You need some representation of units of resources. So essentially money.
right. I don't know what we'd replace
Mic
it with.
drop. No, I'm just kidding.
No, well,
Just
but it kind of tells you it tells you that money is a perceived value.
for sure. And it could easily become
And we
worth
used to
nothing.
have a gold-backed dollar, right? And
Yeah.
it was and then you kind of go, okay, well, who determines the value of gold, right? So then if you only have X amount of dollars compared to gold, then X amount of dollars is worth this much because you could actually take in your money and get that amount in gold.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, then who determines? And then if you have resources, who's going to determine the value of a cord of wood as opposed to 100 chickens?
Yeah. Whoever has the
Who's going to
chickens
determine that?
determines it. What are they willing to sell a chicken for, right?
So is that how the dollar value is? The central bank gives it the value of the dollar?
I think like if you have, let's say you have a motorcycle or a scooter, you do have a scooter,
I
and
do
you
have a
wanted
scooter.
and you wanted to sell it. The value of that scooter would be whatever you're willing to sell it for, right? Somebody comes
Hmm.
off and offers you $10, you're not going to take it. You're like, no, the scooter's worth more than that to me. I'd rather have the scooter than your $10.
Right.
Right?
Someone gave me 100 chickens, however. I might think about it.
Yeah.
The consumption is a big problem too, and the um, implied implied factors of a profit based monetary system. It requires obsolescence, and I think that's the
It
main
doesn't require
key
it,
there.
I don't think. I mean, I would
Promotes
pay
it. How
more,
about we'll
and
say that?
I do pay more for something that's going to last longer if it's something that I want to keep for a
Okay.
long time. But I know that there are companies that make things as cheaply as possible, because that is definitely a factor that people consider when they're going to buy something, is how expensive it is. And if they don't think it's going to last very long, or they don't even plan on using it that long, or they just don't want to think about it, they'll go for the cheaper one, which might have a built-in obsolescence. It might not. I mean, most metal forks last pretty much a lifetime. you know, uh,
Yeah.
you know what I mean. But there's, I mean, I'm sure, especially with electronic stuff, um, you know, even if, and I still do, by the way, I still have a cassette player that plays cassettes.
Wow.
And
Wow.
right, right. And but when you buy a piece of technology like that, you have to assume that in 10 years, it's probably, you're not going to want it anymore. You don't even care if it breaks at this point, you know.
Right. Right.
And the faster something changes, like iPods, or do they even make iPods anymore? I don't even know.
Yeah, they do,
I'm
I think.
I remember it was the newest, coolest technology when it came out, um, but even that seems kind of old fashioned now, you know. Um,
They look like the iPhone though. They have a touch screen and they're basically an iPhone without a like a SIM card place.
hmm.
Like you could basically take a phone, take out a SIM card, and that's your iPod now. Or you can get apps and
Or you can just get a
listen to your
phone,
music and stuff like that.
or you can just
Or you can just
put
get
the
a
music
phone
on your
for
phone,
like
since you already have
$50
one.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
well, let's take a turn for the dark, shall we? And
Da-da-da-da.
so not being sustainable. Do you think that the way that the world is going, manufacturing and creating all the garbage and creating all the pollution, do you think it's sustainable?
No, I don't think the population at this level is sustainable. I mean, I also, producing as much plastic as we do, that's not sustainable. Clearly, it's not sustainable. That
So
stuff
could this
takes
be a
forever.
virus come to balance the scales?
Yes, I think it's sent by God. No, just kidding. I no, it's not going to kill off nearly enough people. But I don't believe in. I just have to say, if whenever you mention the word overpopulation, the first thing people think of is like forced sterilizations or killing people off or something. There's a really simple and easy solution to overpopulation that most people don't know about, and that is granting women human rights. The UN population study, or no, it's called the UN Population Fund, did a study on 17 countries. Each of these countries were trying to do something about their overpopulation problem, and they all tried different things. And the UN was trying to determine which one of these things, which one of these policies that the country tried worked the best. And what they found worked better than anything else is giving women human rights. Because it turns out that most women, if they have the option, don't want to have 8 kids. Most women would
What?
rather have fewer kids and give those kids more resources. So where they have rights, they have fewer children. And when they gain rights, the population growth slows down and sometimes reverses. It's actually in negative in some European countries, and it's close to zero in the United States. Um, but
So how do we give women all women rights?
Well, there's a lot of people working on it, and it's laws that need to be passed in some countries. And actually, this is a good segue into something I wanted to mention, was that there's um, a growing dislike toward capitalism that is misplaced, in my opinion. That uh, you can watch. There's a couple of really good YouTube videos by a guy named Hans Rosling that wrote Factfulness, and he demonstrates with these really interesting. The way he does his graphs is really interesting, but he shows you how much how much things have improved for most people on Earth in the last, I don't know, 100 years. It's astonishing how much better. Like, for example, the number of women, number of girls that are getting education compared to 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I mean, it went from like hardly any to almost all of them around the world. And that's just, and a lot of it has just changed radically, even in the last 30 years. You know, and
Yeah. And
uh,
that would be a direct result of capitalism.
yeah, and capitalism, maybe that, not that one, but there's a lot of things like the poverty, the internationally, the poverty level has really dropped. That is a direct result of capitalism. Probably the biggest change in the number of people who were in desperate poverty was when China went toward a capitalist system. um, and It's really interesting. You should, anybody should watch Hans Rosling's little demonstrations. But there's also, I mean, you can watch what the hell's his name, John Stossel. He has a couple of them about capitalism, that just show you in real numbers how much things have changed because of capitalism, how much things have
You should
improved.
send me some.
That's a good
Send me
idea.
some
I will
videos.
do that. Yeah, because capitalism has gotten a bad rap, especially with younger people. Like it's this
Well, I
evil
think what's
thing.
happening with, well, I think what's happening is that there's such a gap. I think that I don't know that it. You could almost say that there's a dislike for the rich, not even necessarily capitalism. It's just
Yeah,
the the gap between the haves and the have-nots has widened. And I think if you took those same statistics that you were just rattling off, and you looked at the disparity between the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor 50 years ago and today, that gap has gotten extremely wide.
yeah, I know, and I've seen that, but I've also seen the other side of that, which is that the rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten richer in the last 50 years. But I have seen what you're talking about. I'm trying to think of what the name of it. How there has been there's less of a middle class than there used to be. I don't I think it may depend on the way that you show the statistics. I'll send you some stuff and
Mm.
you could see what you think of it. But I'm not 100% sure that that is the case. I've seen numbers that show that although the wealthiest people are even more wealthy than they used to be, people that used to be poor, now there's a lot fewer people that are poor. So that, like, everybody has risen. You know,
Mm.
but but then I've also seen things about the middle class is disappearing. So I'm not sure what. I mean, I guess it depends on the way it's presented, maybe. I don't know, or what you're looking at, or what do you even mean by that. Um,
Yeah.
or maybe like the middle class, it is disappearing in the United States, but more people are reaching the middle class around the world, so the big number is going up. I mean, if the total number of people in the middle class is higher than it used to be, but maybe lower in the United States or something. I don't know. We'll have to look into that one. If only we had a Jamie here that could look into it for us while we're talking.
I know, Jamie, look that up. Um, one of the I saw a, I guess you would call it a meme, the other day, and it said, if you made $2,000 an hour, since um, I think Jesus's birth. I think is what the date they used, um, and saved all your money, um, you still wouldn't have as much money as Jeff Bezos. $2,000 an hour since the birth of Christ. Which, it's because it's hard. It's hard to fathom the kinds of numbers, right? Like all of us. I mean, maybe when you were a kid, it was like when people were like, he's a millionaire.
Yeah,
You're
that
like,
was a
oh
lot.
my God,
Yeah.
like that's whoa. And now it's like billionaire, and you're like, whoa, that's a lot. That's a lot of money, man. And like, what you don't even need. How much money do you need in a year? What do they value a person's life at? Like, what are those insurance company? What are
Actual,
those?
whatever they're called.
Actuaries. What do they value a person's life at? Like $220,000 or something like that.
I don't know.
Something weird, some weird number. But anyways, I mean, how much money do you need? How much money do these corporations need?
Well, it's
And I
interesting
think
you say
that's
that because you keep reminding me of things. I just saw, I just saw, Klassy was just reading me something this morning about that Boeing. Oh, she was talking to Jerry, and Jerry was talking about how he's buying and selling stocks. He's trying to improve his lot, and I'm like, is he making any money right now? I mean, you'd think nobody would be making money right now. And she goes, well, he's looking into um, getting some Boeing stock, and I'm like, really? Isn't their stock crashing right now? And she goes, well, it turns out that Boeing has a huge cash reserve, which Microsoft does too. They don't borrow, apparently. They, I'm hearing this third hand, but so I'm not saying this as fact, but I think it's probably true that Boeing has huge cash reserves. So this, what's happened with their 737 and, and the economy crashing right now and all the planes stopping, and their sales were already stopped. I know that, or not stopped, but really, really, really slowed down before this crash. And now it's got to be, basically nothing. I think they've closed all their plants now or something. Anyway, but that it's not going to be a problem for them because they have such huge cash reserves. So how much money does a corporation need? It depends. I mean, they're going to be able to weather this storm, and all those, 300,000 people or however many people they employ are going to get to keep their jobs. All those airlines are still going to get their planes, you know what I mean? Because this corporation has cash reserves.
And
And
what
if
about the
they,
ones that don't have cash reserves? Do they deserve to be bailed out by the U.S. government?
yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, the only reason, I think the only reason that the government would bail somebody out, well, I mean, maybe if they were, if they were a generous corporation during election time, maybe, or also, I mean, that's a cynical way of looking at it, which may be true, but it's also, I know sometimes they don't want certain industries to crash because it has other consequences.
Well, let's get into that a little bit,
Yeah.
because that's been one of my main points of contention, is the response to this coronavirus threat. And I know the arguments of shutting down the economy and keeping people at home and slowing the spread, flattening the curve. I know all those reasons. But I think when people are starting to talk about, well, what about the economy? There's an immediate pushback, because it sounds like people are saying, well, you're comparing money to lives. And that is not the case at all. You're comparing lives to lives. The economy crashing has a severe public health impact and a severe death rate associated with it.
What do
You
you
can go
mean?
back to any financial, well, you go back to the Great Depression. You think that didn't have a public health impact on
Well,
everybody being out of work and
it's funny you would
everybody
say that.
being stressed out? Well, are you going to tell me that's not true? Are
no,
you
hold
going
on,
to
hold
tell
on.
me that having no job and being stressed out is not going to have
I'm
an
going to tell
impact
you
on
this.
public health?
I'm going to tell you this. The rate of heart disease went way down during the Depression.
Yeah, because they didn't eat anything.
Right. They were fasting more.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So that's your
Yeah.
argument for
No,
the
no, no.
economy crashing is now everybody can go on a fast
No, but you were
because nobody
saying,
can afford food?
you were saying a depression has a huge impact on health. And
I said
part of it,
public health.
public health, yeah, part
Public
of
health.
it is
Right.
is positive.
Ah,
People are
well,
not overeating like they
aren't you
normally
the
do.
ever optimist? Jesus. Well, let's talk about the
Okay,
negatives for a second.
yeah, but
Okay.
tell me about the
Why don't we
deaths.
talk about the domestic? Why don't we talk about the domestic violence increase already happening?
How much is it? Does
How
anybody
much is
know?
what
How
the
much
domestic
has it
violence?
increased?
It's probably a
Does
little
anybody
early to
know?
find those numbers.
Yeah.
No, but apparently there's a surge according to people
Well, I
because
would
people are
imagine.
stuck at home
Absolutely. That makes sense.
with their shitty kids and their shitty wives and their shitty husbands. So everybody's just beating on each
Some
other.
people are home with their nice wives and husbands too.
Well, hopefully they're not beating them.
Yeah.
But there is a severe problem happening with this quarantine, and
I
I
have
think
heard
that
that there are more calls for domestic violence. That statistic has gone up.
okay,
I don't know how much,
is
but
that a public health issue?
it's for sure a little bit, I would think.
Okay, and what
Yeah.
about the food supply? What about all the crops that are basically getting thrown away? What about the supply chain getting disrupted?
I don't know
What
about
about people
crops
losing
being
their
thrown away.
jobs? What about the restaurants and businesses that are closing that probably won't even reopen?
Well, we
Now,
don't know that. That's part of the bailout is to make sure that they're
perfect.
able to
That's
reopen.
exactly what I want to say. We don't know. Okay, so we don't know. And if you say that we do know about this coronavirus, you're full of shit because we don't really know. What we're
We don't know
learning is
what.
sort of as we don't know what would have happened. We don't
Oh
know
yeah,
like
yeah.
we responded to a threat that we didn't know about and instead caused a real life thing that we could probably figure out a little bit easier than the actual like if we actually can predict the crashing of the financial markets and the amount of debt and all these things, that's probably we could probably factor that in and figure that out a lot faster than we can actually figure out what this coronavirus and what the actual response should have been. So we basically traded a perceived threat. We responded to a perceived threat that we didn't really know that much about and created tangible real life consequences
Mm-hmm.
over a perceived threat
Yeah.
for the greater good.
And you think that's wrong?
That's everyone's
Is that
talking.
what you're
Well,
saying?
I think it's illogical.
What would
I
have been
think
the
that
if you were the president? What would have been your logical response?
start testing people and keep things running as normal
Okay, what
and
if you couldn't get the
isolating.
tests? What would you do?
Well, then
That's
I
been
would
a
start figuring
problem.
out who I would I would figure out who was at most risk, which we kind of figured out early on, which were people with pre-existing respiratory issues and the elderly. That was the immediate thing we knew, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So why don't we isolate those people?
Okay.
Isolate those people, but we didn't do that.
So you would have done like basically what Finland did. You just isolate the older people and let everybody else do what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a lot of people that would agree with you. Yeah. I personally don't have an opinion on it one way or the other. And it may have been a good idea. Who knows?
Right. We don't know. But what we do know, and I think, I mean, I could be talking out of my ass here, but I think that the repercussions of the economy are gonna far outweigh whatever this death total of this coronavirus is gonna end up with at the end.
That's possible
And
for sure.
again, I don't know either. Nobody knows, right? Everything is kind of up in the air. But what we do, what I know, see, the coronavirus has impacted people's lives. People have died, and that's obviously that's a fact that everyone has to face that. Everyone has to realize that that's what happened. The coronavirus came, infected people, caused them to die.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that was because they caught another disease because their immune system was lower, or if it was directly just because they got so sick from coronavirus that they died and they were elderly or something. So that's a fact. We can look at that and see that as a fact. But what we also can look at is there's a lot of things that kill people all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and homelessness and uh, not being employed, not being able to make money, also causes death.
Mm-hmm. Which is what
So
the stimulus
to
package was supposed to help keep people from
right, right,
homeless and keep
right.
people from make sure people have a job to go back to. That's what they were trying
I
to
heard
do.
a statistic that on April 1st, 1/3 of America didn't pay rent. I don't know how accurate that statistic is, or um, how much of a
I know some people that
exaggeration that
didn't.
could be.
Uh,
Well, I know some people that didn't too, but I mean, a third that's a pretty staggering number.
yeah.
And the unemployment numbers and just the amount of people. I mean, the amount of people that have applied for unemployment
This actually cracks me up.
alone is
That cracks me up. The fact that
staggering.
that's news cracks me up. Like they closed all of these business and then they're saying on the news, and today's unemployment rates are out, astronomical. And you're like, well, duh, why is that news? You know, like if you close a
Yeah,
bunch of
yeah,
businesses, what did you expect is going to happen? you know,
right, right.
duh, you
Uh,
know,
well,
anyway.
I also feel the same way about like, 2,000 new cases in New York. That doesn't seem like very staggering numbers to me either.
Yeah. What do you
Um,
mean?
I mean, like the numbers being thrown at us from coronavirus.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Numbers of
That
deaths. So
doesn't seem
it's
like
only like
super crazy either.
100,000 around the world, which is, out of what is it, 7.5 billion now. That's not a lot.
No, and
Tragic
I
and
want to see,
terrible. It's
yeah,
a hundred
yeah,
thousand more
sure.
than would have been maybe, but it's not.
Or maybe
But
not. Maybe these people would have died of natural pneumonia or
well, most
natural
most
causes
of
or
them
whatever.
wouldn't have. People are dying
We
from
don't know.
no. I mean, there's a lot of people that have died that would not have died, wouldn't even gotten sick.
And there's a lot of people that have died, and because they had coronavirus are saying it was because of coronavirus. So we will never know
Right.
how many actually died of
Yeah.
coronavirus.
But the thing is, though, we're looking at numbers with almost the entire world being socially distancing. We have no idea what it would have been. And in my opinion, if we had, if we didn't the whole world didn't handle this very well. I mean, there was a couple places that handled it better than others, um, but if I was going to give a grade to the world and the way they responded to this, it would be like a
Yeah,
C. And
C minus maybe.
if it was a horrible disease that killed people really badly, like Ebola or something, if it was like Ebola, only as contagious as COVID, we would have failed miserably. It would have killed everybody.
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
uh,
yeah. This is the pandemic on easy mode, and we failed.
totally, yeah. But I mean, hopefully, a lot of things have been learned because it is possible to really shut down a contagion by simply doing what we're doing right now. If you can do it, and people know what to do, and because this is going to happen again, and it's probably, I mean, it's entirely possible for something much worse than this to happen. Where
Oh yeah,
we would really need to shelter in place and jump right on it. The problem, most of this problem has been caused because people waited too long to jump on it. I was just watching a thing tonight that was about how few COVID-19 cases they have in San Francisco. And it was because before there was even a single death in San Francisco, they sheltered in place. Like everybody else has waited until it was bad enough that they could feel justified in shutting down their economy. But by then it's of course too far. It's too far spread too much, right? So if you're going to do something like this, you need to shut it down immediately. That's why Taiwan did so well. They were expecting it. They knew it was going to come. They already had figured out what to do on the last one, which was, I think, SARS. And they said, okay, next time this happens, this is what we're going to do. And they did it. And they immediately shut their airports. They immediately started tracking anybody, testing people. They were so on top of it. Speed is everything in this game, you know. And like this whole shutting down of the world's economy didn't have to happen if people knew how to deal with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
could,
I agree.
if it could be nipped in the bud right off the bat, you don't have to choose between people dying or the economy crashing. You could have both. Not that you have people dying and the economy crashing, but no, you could have neither. Is what I mean.
2 for 1. So where do you think we go? Do we all have a Amber Alert style system on our phones, and as soon as there's an outbreak, everyone's told to go home and shelter in place for 2 weeks? How does this work?
Yeah, this is the problem. This is the big question, I think, over the next few months is, will people just go back to their uh, governments, I mean, systems, go back to their old way, or will things be put in place to make sure this kind of thing, we have a better response next time? Um, I know that one of the reasons that Germany and South Korea have done so well is their level of surveillance that they use, and I think Israel's using it now too, where they can really track everybody's phone and who you've been close to. You know, they one phone can know whether it's close to another, or whoever's tracking it can know whether these two phones were close to each other, right? So if you get tested
Right.
positive, then it can backtrack 14 days and find out all the people you've been in contact with, and then those people can be quarantined. It seems like a police state in that way. Like, that's why China was able to shut it down so fast, because they do have that level of surveillance. They were using cameras, facial recognition, phone tracking, everything. It was a full.
That doesn't scare you at all?
Right? Yes, it does. I mean, it's
Yeah.
so that of course would be one way of doing that, but because obviously you can look at the free people of the United States and see that some people don't even listen to common sense advice. you know so how are you going to enforce this? How, if you say, look, there's a we don't we're there's no danger for us right now, but we're gonna do a shelter in place for the next 2 weeks. How much compliance would you get? And if
Well,
you didn't get
so
enough
that's where the
compliance, then
conspiracy
what's the
theories come in.
point?
Well,
There's
this is
no. What
where the conspiracy theories come in,
do you mean?
and well, that's where the vaccines come in too. I'll give you this theory that's out there. So right now, that's the general consensus, is the tracking of people through their phones, right? Well, then the obvious thing is, well, I'm just not going to have my phone, and then
Mm-hmm.
I'll give a middle finger to the satellites, and they can go fuck themselves. Okay, well, what if there was an ability to actually ID people, where you could actually put something on a person's body, or even with the nanotechnology that we have,
Like they
put
do with
something in a
dogs.
vaccine, right?
Mm,
Tag people, and that way, if you don't have your phone, you can still be tracked and located. And if you're not complying,
diabolical.
they'll come pick you. They'll come pick you up. So that seems to be an extreme police state conspiracy theory. But
But not
in
entirely
terms of,
unreasonable, though. If you think about, because I mean, when you see somebody, walking, a group of people walking around right now, you go, dude, you're endangering all of us, by doing that.
okay,
Like you're
what
making
about the
this.
people that are being let out of jail right now?
Right. I know. Oh my
Okay, to
God.
make room and for fears of social distancing, letting
Right.
people out of jail, and then arresting people for not social distancing. Does that make sense to you?
What do you mean?
I mean, people getting fined and arrested for disobeying the social distancing rules right now.
Right. What is that? I didn't understand the relation between
Does
that
that,
and
well,
prisoners.
between that, well, and we're letting people out? So basically, we're trading an existing prisoner for someone that's disobeying
Oh,
the
oh, oh, I see what you mean. You
shelter
mean
in
they're
place.
arresting them and taking them to jail?
Right.
Probably not taking them to prison, though. Probably fining them or whatever. But I get what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
At
I
least I
mean,
got the relationship between the
at a
two.
certain point, it's six of one, half dozen of another, right? So
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could find somebody and not put them in jail, and so in which case your argument would fall apart. But it does make sense to me, though, to do something. If you're passing a law that says you can't gather in groups, and then people gather in groups, then you must do something. You know what I mean? Otherwise, your words are empty. Your law is nothing.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I mean, what's the point of even passing the law if you're not going to enforce it? It's ridiculous, right? Don't pass it then.
Well,
Just plead with
it seems
people.
like we're going back to the Red Scare a little bit, where we're like, if you see your neighbor out walking their dog, call the police, kind of a thing. It's like, if you suspect your neighbor of being a communist, let us know. It kind of feels that way to me.
And that's a bad thing. I'm assuming you think that's a
Yeah,
bad thing.
yeah. I mean,
So
I think the cutting people off, not letting people congregate. It's a rough one, because
yeah,
it's
there's a good argument on both
all
sides.
done in, yeah. I mean, the perfect argument is it's for everybody's benefit of the greater good.
Right.
Which
Which
I'm
and you
pretty
can make a
sure
really
was
good argument
probably
for that.
Hitler's main point. Hitler
Abs-
probably made a really good argument for it then.
Absolutely, but that doesn't make it wrong now. You know what I mean? I mean, Hitler probably made some good arguments too. you know, I mean,
Yeah,
he wasn't dumb. You know what I mean?
no.
So anyway, I mean, and people say that it's like, well, Hitler could have made that argument. Yeah, I know, but probably, Franklin Delano Roosevelt would have made the same argument. You know, that doesn't make it evil just because Hitler said it. You know, you know what I mean? He also said that
Yeah,
the German mark should be based on the worker, which was kind of a cool thing. But anyway, that's another story. Um,
yeah, yeah. We'll save that for our Hitler podcast.
yeah, that'll be fun.
Hitler and the fascist regime. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some trends here, that I guess I'm a little concerned about, as all,
Yeah,
and I don't
you're not
think that
alone.
they all need to be lumped into conspiracy theories. I don't think they all need to be dismissed just because they induce fear. I think that's a real big problem we're having right now, is that we're so afraid. And and I think you and anyone else that has any knowledge of basic psychology, um, that those decisions made out of fear, you know, tend to tend to be, in retrospect, not always the best decisions.
Yeah,
And I think that we need to maybe have a little bit more discussion and a little bit more, um, not just fully, not going full throttle before thinking about what we're doing. I think that's what I want, and I
I agree with that.
understand the sense of urgency. I get
Yeah,
that, but I also think that there's also there should be also a sense of reason and logic
for
involved.
sure. Yeah, and this again, this is in on this issue that makes it very difficult because the best thing you could do is react quickly, right? And
Right.
and if they had to debate it uh, while it's
Right. The
spreading,
sense of
yeah,
urgency is obviously paramount, and that's when fear,
yeah. Let's say,
survival instinct kicks in.
yeah, let's say they did a vote, a national vote to find out to determine whether we're going to do a shelter in place nationally or not, and the vote took 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. There'd be
Well, if we
lots of
had like
debate and lots
apps
of
on our
talking.
phone where we could just vote,
Yeah.
I would like to see there to be some sort of way, now that we have this technology and computers, and obviously you would have to have something in place for people that didn't have those things, but for the majority of people, I mean, and
Almost everybody has a phone.
I understand the logistical problem and the chance for the hacking and the manipulation of statistics, and I understand all that. But I mean, it would be kind of, I mean, like we were talking about, you know, America's Got Talent, or American Idol or something, where like people can literally text a phone number and vote for who they want on that show, and they
Yeah.
get those results in that show.
Right.
Like there's no delay. There's no
And you
and
know,
yeah,
we have the technology on our phones now to prove that it's us. You know what I mean?
right,
Like
right.
you
Fingerprint,
know,
facial recognition,
banks
all
require
that stuff.
it. Everybody requires. Fucking Amazon requires it. You know, I mean,
Authentication is the
yeah,
thing,
the-
right? Yeah.
yeah. So there is a way that the government could easily do that. That'd be so awesome to just vote on issues on the spot.
Right. Like all of a sudden Congress gets something right, and they were like, okay, let's put it to the
Yeah,
public.
we don't know
And
what to do.
then there's a
Yeah,
thing that's going, okay, text, if you want this to pass, text this number, text it yes or no.
yeah,
It's like, all right, well,
yeah.
and then, I mean, the statistics too on census is pretty accurate. Population censuses, stuff like that.
Hmm.
And so you could almost from a very like probably 10% of the nation could participate in something like that, and you could pretty much determine what passes and what fails, almost, like it's almost
Yeah.
like you wouldn't even need full participation. But obviously, I mean, something like that would be cool. I mean, if voting really actually does anything. We can
For
save that for
another
another
podcast.
podcast. Yeah.
That was our conversation for the evening. I hope you enjoyed it. This is Adam Lee Kahn and my son, Ben Wagner, on The Atom Bomb.